Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Reconnection. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into a topic we've been holding off on for a very long time. We're going to discuss ET lore across the world, how it can be related to either healing work or to things that can be integrated into our daily lives. And I think that this is a topic that, being in Western American culture, has a lot of stigma around, has a lot of I think, clouded perception just simply because ET lore from other cultures is looked at as kind of a commonplace, whereas for us, we kind of limit it to our tinfoil hat wearers and people on the fringe of society. So I think that's kind of where I want to start is talking about ET lore across the world and how other cultures view these concepts. And by doing so, I'm actually going to bring it over to you, Lynn, and ask, I know that obviously you were born and raised in American society, but I know that you had some deep understanding of both your Vietnamese and Chinese culture and background. Do you feel like that informed your comprehension and understanding of ET lore or extra dimensional ideas and things in those realms?
Yeah, this is a really interesting and exciting topic to talk about because I think it's so prevalent right now. I think it has been in like the very alternative communities, but I think it is becoming something that people are open to talking about multidimensionality. To me, it's really about multidimensionality. That like there's also this dimension, the physical reality, and then within like Chinese culture, we have yin and yang. So you can't have yin without yang. You can't have the physical without the non-physical. So to me, I almost see it like that. There's sort of it's a spectrum. And so we live along somewhere that spectrum. And also we believe in or we have stories and myths and different traditions that speak about all of the things in between. And so being Vietnamese and being Chinese I think helped prime me. And also having a Buddhist background, me going to the temple like since I was 6 years old, just me watching the whole process of being at a temple, the monks praying, praying to Buddha, praying to Kuan Yin, like just being in that type of environment where spirituality was just so embraced and praying was so embraced. And like it never really occurred to me that like, oh yeah, why is this happening? Like this doesn't make sense. It all just like clicked because I knew somewhere deep down as a child, like, oh right, like we are connecting to a source of energy that's beyond us that each and every one of us are connected to. And so to me, I feel like it has my cultural roots have primed me for learning about multidimensionality, learning about extraterrestrial life forms, and all of these other things that exist beyond our comprehension of this reality. And I definitely feel like learning about Chinese medicine has definitely informed that as well. And just knowing that as a child, I used to be with my mom and do prayers and offerings to our ancestors and to Buddha. And like that was one way to send the physical into the ethereal. And like that was just like common for me and I think for many people within Asian cultures. Like if you look at Thailand, like there's so many gods and goddesses and myths. If you look at Bali and Indonesia, they have so many different traditions and ways of looking and understanding energy as well. Like these star beings can be also gods and goddesses and mythical creatures. If you look at China, China definitely has so many mythologies within it as well. These gods, these thunder gods, these gods of fortune, these
Even the dragons.
the dragons, yes. Like Vietnamese also has some of those like influences from China as well. So if you look just like beyond into many different parts of Asia, there is so much influence of mythology. There's so much influence of multidimensionality. Tibet is a really amazing example of this. There's Tara, which is the goddess of mercy and compassion, very similar to Kuan Yin within like Chinese and Vietnamese culture, but Tara has like 130, 108 emanations, like different variations of Tara. And what does that tell you? There's like multiple facets of one source energy, which can be God, goddess, universe, spirit, multidimensional, extraterrestrial beings, if you look at it like that. So it all just depends on how you look at it. I'm curious for you, Jordan, what your take is on that. How did you feel like your cultural roots primed you for this?
Yeah, no, and I love the lens. I mean, just from what I've learned, and of course, putting my own opinions on your type of culture is just that
Mm-hmm.
when I learned Chinese medicine, and then when I learned about like the Vedas in India, so a lot of like Asian
Mm,
disciplines, I guess, you know, my brain, just the way it works and operates, I kind of already perceive those deities almost as, you know, maybe those were like an ancient understanding of beings that did come from another place, from, you know, even like the Vedas say that the some of the like beings came from like fiery ships coming from the sky, and like that could be looked at ET Starliner, you know. And a lot of these beings, and I'm not me to disrespect the religions, I'm just saying like if you look at a lot of Indian religions, they're seen as like these blue beings that emanated from another place, and that kind of has a very ET quality to it, you know.
mm-hmm.
Even when we were discussing Chinese medicine, a lot of texts from China, Japan, areas in Asia and India, they would give credit to the writing of these ancient texts to a star being or system or collective.
Yeah.
That could have just been their tradition of not wanting to identify personally with the text, but it also could have been deeply rooted in something else. So
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, and this is why I have always such a neutral slate on a lot of these things, is that I was not raised with any mythology, with any religion, with any belief system, any of this stuff. It was more so my own personal interests that informed me, and these fell under those categories of my own personal interests. However, that being said, I do believe that it's still, um, I think that blank slate was helpful though, because
Mm-hmm.
it didn't give me an inherent bias on how to view or perceive something. It kind of did give me a neutral space to kind of filter this stuff through. Um, and again, I don't want to say disrespectful when I say this, but it made me look at so many religions and mythologies, because religions, you know, are by definition from a scientific lens called a mythology. It made me look at many mythologies as potential metaphors, of course, but also potential truths hidden in those metaphors. And some of them really
Yes.
could be interpreted as beings coming from someplace else to come either assist, intervene, and interact in those ways. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that I definitely would have to agree with that.
Yeah.
Where
I
was your
love
brain going anywhere? Otherwise, I
it.
had
My
to.
brain was going into a thousand places, but what wants to come forth is one that to kind of connect this back to like the star system, to connect it back to astronomy and like astrology.
Yeah,
So many of these myths and stories and traditions were built off of understanding that yes, there are so many constellations above us, and those constellations are literally made of light and molecules and minerals and all of the things, and those things influence what's happening here on Earth. Like, doesn't that make sense that like something that's happening, it's almost like the butterfly effect, but
yeah,
if you blow that out into the galactic perspective, means there's like one little shift of light in thousands of light years away from us can make a shift here on Earth, and vice versa. And so I think to ground these into something even more abstract is that many of these myths and goddesses and gods and ways of understanding the lores about our own lives come from understanding the energies of these star systems, such as like the Pleiades constellation or any of the constellations that are connected to astrology as well. And then the second thing I was going to share was speaking about. I love that you brought in the Hinduism culture because, you know, in India they had so many different ways of seeing the divine as or consciousness in a spectrum. There's these fierce goddesses and fierce demon, you know, warriors and all of these things. And I think on some level those are all speaking to different patterns that humans go through. Like we all somewhat go through deep challenges that mimic dark nights of the soul. That like these gods and goddesses, like Inyana goes through this, the goddess Inyana, who goes into the underworld and goes into Hades and like confronts the underworld. It's literally a human confronting their deepest fears and challenges in their life. And so I think that is how the ancient civilizations, I think, believed and understood life, was through symbolism, was through
Yeah.
story, was through tradition. And so I think we still have that. We're still built on that. Like our systems are still built on symbolism and connecting to the subconscious in that way. So I wonder what comes up for you as I'm speaking that.
Well, and it's funny that you say that too, is because I think that symbolism so deeply informs our reality. However, most
Mm-hmm.
people are not aware of how that symbolism is deeply informing our reality, and how it makes up everything. And I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
dovetail just for a second here, but it's like, Catholicism informed a lot of Western society. And I don't even think like something like our movies or pop culture, people don't realize that a lot of those are derived from either Bible stories or symbolism from the past and things in
Right.
those realms. And so, it's actually perfect that you brought that up because I was going to talk about how a lot of ET concepts were perceived across the world. We kind of covered Asia for a second there. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
bring it now to like the Nordic region. And, the Norse mythology, which has kind of been popularized by things like Marvel, had characters like Thor and Odin and Freya and all these beings who are said to
Mm-hmm.
be from Asgard. And you can look at that as just a regular mythology, or you could look at Asgard as its own star system, and these beings came from Asgard to help the Nordic people. So a lot of even that mythology has this overlay of beings from out there coming down here and assisting. And it's funny how, again, we're talking about symbology informing our day to day, and we don't even realize it. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if you even picked up on this with your deep knowledge of lore. Do you realize that our days of the week is Nordic mythology? So what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by that is, like for instance, Thursday is Thor's day.
Thor's Day.
Friday
Yes.
is Freya's day.
Oh, uh-huh.
Wednesday is Odin is said Woden in Norse. So it's
Whoa.
Wednesday, Odin's day. So even something as simple as that, again, the symbology is informing our day to day and something we use all the time and we don't even realize it. And again, this is also deeply seated in something that can be perceived as or thought as ET lore. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that for me, it's important to bring that forward, having Nordic background, and even my name Maxwell coming from that region.
Mm-hmm.
And as I kind of take a little step away from that, I think because we are talking kind of abstract and that in mythology and things like that, I think I want to do bring some like evidential things that maybe there really is some real entities or beings existing here. And I'm going to take us to Western Africa for a second, which is again where my African lineage comes from. And I'm sure you've heard of the Dogon tribe.
Sounds
So
familiar.
so
Yes.
in their lore and mythology, they are said to come from beings from the stars, specifically aquatic beings from the stars. And they've always stated that their star system that they came from now translates to Sirius. And they would always say it was a binary star system. So there was an A and a B that circled each other, and that's the star system that they believe their culture came from. Well, the really, really cool thing about this is up until modern astronomy was developed, nobody knew that Sirius was actually a binary system. So their lore has said it from the very beginning that that's a binary system. But it wasn't until we developed telescopes to actually, observe the star in the sky, where we are like, oh
Mm-hmm.
shit, there are two stars actually there. So I feel like there's a lot, and this is only one example of hundreds or thousands of examples like that. But I find it so compelling that their lore was actually based on something we're now able to back up with. And I think a lot of lore has some very interesting idealisms about that you're actually now finding some concrete astronomical phenomenon to match some of the astrology of the lore. And don't get me wrong, we could obviously justify this with our logical brain of like maybe they had some really, really mathematical, creative way of calculating things that we don't have a way of perceiving of. Or we can go to the other extreme and think that there is some further connection to a star system. But I do think it's interesting to contemplate there. Anything on that?
Honestly, I'm just thinking about have you watched The Rings of Power? I'm totally gonna do a little tangent here, but
I love tangents.
oh my gosh,
I have
have
not
you
seen it though.
the Lord of the Rings? It's like their spin-off show of The Rings of Power, and literally, I'm just thinking about because this is like the before the Lord of the Rings, like the trilogy happened. It was like this is way, way before then, where they're talking about the beginning of Gandalf and like how Gandalf literally came in into this Middle Earth area as in an asteroid, and he's this wizard that doesn't know he's a wizard, that literally finds out and remembers his powers and remembers how strong he is and remembers why he's there to help the civilization. And thinking about how there's a shaman in that show who looks at these maps of the stars and is able to kind of show them and show like the communities there, like, okay, this is going to happen because there's like this shifting, the sun is shifting this way. And so like I think these ancient civilizations knew and took so much from what was happening outside of them. They received the insights from what was happening in the stars, from what was happening with the sun and the moon. Similar to like when we think about Chinese medicine, like the earliest forms and documentation of Chinese medicine was scripted on oracle bones that were created from priestesses and monks and people who were channeling information from the divine.
No,
And so,
and
yeah,
to cut you off there real quick, and it's one of those things where we look at, for most major religions had either prophets or
yes,
humans that were speaking, the words of God. We could argue that that was just channeling, that was
totally.
extraterrestrial information and things along those lines. So even most
Hmm.
of our religious lore, if you will, has some extraterrestrial nuance to it, to say the least.
Totally, totally. I think a lot of our world is kind of built off of that. And I love that you brought up the how the days of the week are connected to that. I mean, they're also connected to the stars, literally, like the astrological planets. So you could think of Saturn,
Mm,
Saturday, Monday as the moon day, and it's like all sort of created based off of these connection to the stars, connection to the world beyond us. If you look at news, like NEWS, it's northeast, west, and south.
mm,
And that's how they understood the news, by looking at what was happening in the north, east, west, and south. Which stars are where are the constellations going? And to kind of bring this back into what we're talking about today, which is the ETs or star civilizations, I've been really, really connected to the goddess and the myth of Kuan Yin, who is the goddess of compassion and mercy in Asian cultures. But specifically, they started connecting. There's this myth that Kuan Yin is connected to Pleiades, and Pleiades, the
mm,
constellation of Pleiades, and how oftentimes they talk about Pleiades as the seven planets within this constellation, and that seven planet constellation is actually a symbol of the divine feminine.
mm,
And Kuan Yin comes in as a part of that constellation. She is a part of the divine feminine. And also other manifestations of that come through, such as in different, I think we see it in different cultures and traditions and religions, such as Mother Mary or Mary Magdalene
mm.
or white buffalo calf woman in Native American
Yeah.
cultures. It's like we're seeing all these different emanations of the divine feminine, but it's connected to this constellation of Pleiades and many other star systems. And so,
So
yeah,
I love when the last three times you've spoken, you completely dovetailed exactly where I was going to go with the conversation.
perfect.
So thank you for this. And so I was actually going to go into Mother Mary, and so sorry to cut you off
Mm,
there, but that's what I wanted to speak about because we covered a little bit of Asia, we covered a little bit of like Nordic region, covered a little bit of
mhm.
Africa. Now I'd like to go to my other heritage, which is Italy, and that's where a lot of Catholicism comes out of. Um,
Mhm.
and I wonder if you've ever had this thought, because I had this thought when deeply looking into star lore and just looking into religions across the world to begin with. And dude, the story of Jesus himself is like the story of a star being born. And what I mean by this is like Mother Mary's Immaculate Conception almost sounds
Mhm.
like the woman was like taken up somewhere, inseminated, and then dropped back and was like, "You're about to burst some crazy being," you know. And
Mhm.
it's funny that when you look at actual like biblical texts of surrounding Jesus's birth, there was so much star symbolism in the Bible of like when this star aligns with this star, when this happens with that, there's going to be this birthing of the Son of God. And again,
Mm.
even just looking at that terminology and that translation, we could say that the Son of God could have been an interpretation. It could have been the son of the beings that he came from. If he was, artificially inseminated by a higher dimensional being, it could be that
Mm-hmm.
that was the translation, that he is the son of this, system. So
Mm-hmm.
it's fun, of course, look at that way. And again, no meaning to disrespect religion and what it means to other people, but again, I'm just working with the metaphor and symbolism there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we can again kind of see that translation, because even the religion that most directly predates Catholicism in the region, so a lot of your Egyptian lores and myths, I don't think we really need to go into those. I think those ones are so on the nose, like
Mm-hmm.
extraterrestrial based. But that
Mm-hmm.
being said, you can see how that has influenced all of those areas, societies, and cultures. And I think that
Yep.
does a pretty good job of summarizing these lores across the world. I think the last place I need to pay homage to is, of course, the Americas. And I know that you're just as aware as I am, is that most indigenous Americans, Pacific Islanders, people from those regions and indigenous communities, I mean, their entire spirituality and system is based off the stars. A lot
Totally.
of them have the talks of actually coming from either the Pleiades or coming from. I follow this one man from Hawaii who says that literally his Hawaiian tradition states that they come from four separate star systems, including
Mm-hmm.
Sirius, Draconis, and Pleiades, and it's just written in all of their lore. So
Mm-hmm.
again, these are not, these very abstract concepts to people of these cultures. They're kind of just their day-to-day understanding of reality and how things work. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, first off, if you have anything to note or add about, the indigenous people of Americas. But secondly, I'm just curious, with the whole Jesus and story from Catholicism. Have you ever had
Mm-hmm.
that thought before?
So with the whole Jesus thing, the first thing that came to mind, I don't know if this even answers your question, but
No.
I started thinking recently having this realization that we all each can resonate with Jesus' story and him becoming the light, Christ consciousness. And I think what's happening right now, just collectively with consciousness, is that people are reclaiming that I hold that light, that same light that Jesus has,
Well, and that's perfect for the metaphor, even though too,
Yeah.
is that because under most belief systems, the belief is that the human race is a star race. So saying that we come
Yes.
from that as well makes a lot of sense.
Please, this is so great because I was literally just thinking, I can do this. Maybe this is one thing I'm a gift of mine. I don't know, but I have maybe it's just also being an empath where I can literally put myself in another person's shoes and then look back at myself.
Yeah.
And so like imagine being like a star being on the other side and like this race of people are saying like, "Oh, this person does not exist." It's like, "No, like this is a vast universe of infinite possibility, and we are literally created of stardust,
Yeah.
like the cosmos. So who's to say that we are just another race of star people, star civilization, just like obviously working out what we need to work out on this planet,
Yeah.
but we are doing it in our own way. And also I think we're so, like, if you think about human beings on this planet, we're the smartest intelligent mammal. Have we can literally use our brain to create and channel information and literally co-create anything that we want on this planet. Like, we are star beings on some
Yeah.
level. And so I think when we resonate with a specific star civilization or a myth or a lore, I think there's something there and we have to pay attention to it because it's just pointing out something that, oh my goodness, like it's like meeting another person at like a party and you're like, I resonate with you. Me and you have different places that we were born from, but we have so many similarities and we have so many interests and like similar things that we share. I think it's the same thing. It's just like meeting a friend,
And I
and
think
I
it gives
think,
you a
yeah,
template to further express that too.
totally. I think this is a good segue to go into the Star Lores and explore them. What do you
No,
think?
I think that this is a perfect area to do that, and I want to, of course, segment us off with utilizing the construct of Harry Potter to help introduce a few of them. So
Yes.
again, I know that I've kind of explained this theory to you, but I wonder how much you resonate with the story. So we're going to kind of talk about like the big concepts, especially in Western society, of actual Star Wars. So one of the biggest ones that people hear about, even in pop culture now, I think even Doja Cat has a song about it, is the lizard people, the Draconis, the people behind the scene controlling everything. And it's one of those concepts. It's fun to idealize and like think about, and I think it's one worth speaking about. So this is the star system Draconis. It's associated with reptilian beings, dragons, things in those realms. And when we look at my correlation to Hogwarts to help you comprehend the traits of this being, it's very, very correlated to Slytherin. And what I mean by that, Slytherin are known as being cunning, manipulative, behind the scenes a little bit. And literally, Draco Malfoy's name is Draco, which, again, the star system Draconis. So I think that was on the nose intentionally. And a few other, I feel like Easter eggs from the actual movie itself is that the fact that Slytherin's lair is actually the basement of the school. And, lizard people are said to live in, caverns underneath. So I think that's on the nose. And then just the fact that Slytherin's symbol is a snake. So the reptilian aspect of it as well. And I think last but not least, the speaking of like Postle tongue, I think is like a node to Draconian light language and things in that realm.
Interesting.
And I think that the best way to view the lens of this using the Slytherin lens is that, let's say these beings are real and are an informative species. I think we need to keep in mind that they're not inherently evil. It's that these attributes and traits tend to be able to go towards that way more easily. It's one of those things where even like in the movies, like Harry Potter was told he can choose his path, whether it be Gryffindor or Slytherin, because he had traits that attributed to both. And he was told all that really matters is how you decide to do and use what's inside of you. So before I move beyond Draconis lore, do you have anything else to add there before going on number 2?
I'm just thinking about Draco Malfoy and how he's such an embodiment of all the things that you're speaking to, and that I think consciousness is on a spectrum too.
Yeah.
That's another thing to kind of know. It's like it's not just one side's bad, one side's good, and they're both in their silos and they're separated. No, it's all in one. It's all on a spectrum. And so Draco Malfoy and Harry Potter are like enemies of each other, but actually they just express what's inside of them differently
And
and
they
in
very
different
much so mirror each
frequencies.
other.
Yes, like people in Gryffindor look up to Harry Potter because he's this hero, but if you also look at it, if you were in the House of Slytherin, you would also look at Draco Malfoy as a hero,
Very, very
right?
much so.
So it's like, hey, come on, they're on a spectrum. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
No, I
I'm curious
appreciate
about your
that.
next ones.
No,
Yeah.
so we're going to move into Sirius. So that's another star system that people believe is well informing to the planet. Sirius is a star system in which people believe inform most of our ancient civilization that we know as advanced. What I mean by that is Egyptian civilization is said to have been formed by most of our Egyptian pyramids aligned in some way to Sirius. We can also look at Mesoamerican cultures. A lot of their pyramid systems align towards Sirius as well. So Sirius is usually given credit for most of our ancient civilizations who had advancement. Whether or not you believe that or not, that's just part of the lore. And so therefore, since Sirius kind of gets the flashy node, they would be associated with Gryffindor. And I think it's pretty on the nose as well, just because the Gryffindor symbolism has this like lioness aspect, which is also seen a lot in Egyptian lore and things like that. But also, this wasn't as so on the nose as well, because one of the most famous Gryffindors is Sirius Black, who literally turns into a dog. And Sirius is in the dog star system. So I think, again, this one was very, very much so on the nose. And I think that Harry Potter himself embodies a lot of what people view the Syrian lore is. They're almost seen as the saviors. And there's actually a lot of discussion and talk about Jesus himself being a Syrian being. So again, there's almost this savior quality to them. There's almost this trying to help other people and really coming in as the hero. Anything to add there before moving on to the next?
Interesting. Yeah, I'm just like connecting it to like the Leo sort of archetype and how the brightest star of Leo, like the Leo constellation, is Regulus. And I think there's Regulus Black, right? Or
Regulus
Sirius
Black as well, so that's in there too.
is,
So.
yes. I don't know. I just made that connection now. And, thinking about Leo as like being connected to the heart, like so much, I think, when you're even connected to the color scheming of Harry Potter, the reds, the golds of Gryffindor, but the
That's
greens and the blacks of Slytherin. It's like you're getting a different vibe from both of them that tells the story. Like even without actually saying things, you can just tell from the warmth, the colds, the color schemes. It's just really fascinating.
and how well the symbolism works with explaining these concepts to somebody is so very, very
Totally.
helpful. So, moving on to the next one, which I'm most excited to tell you about because of your own personal histories and experiences. So, Ravenclaw, we're going to associate with Arcturus because Arcturus is seen
Oh.
as like the most intellectually capacitated star beings, and they're said to be very
Mm.
knowledgeable about things. And
Yeah.
Ravenclaw, there's a few very on the nose tips from Ravenclaw. The prize token of the house is the diadem, which is basically a crown for like channeling higher dimensional information. So like that's a pretty on the nose aspect of it. But
Yes.
secondly, and I'll thank ChatGPT. I'm going to like, thank my homie on this one, and it's that actually in the video game, if you go into the Ravenclaw Tower, you can see the Arcturus star system. So I feel like that was definitely intentionally planned that Arcturus is viewed clearly from the Ravenclaw Tower. So I think that that was another little note to this theory and this lore lining up very well together.
I
Any
don't.
other? Go
That's
on.
wild to me. And like I'm just like processing what you're saying. But one thing that's standing out is like Ravenclaw. Okay, the raven. The raven is this animal that is this bridge between multiple dimensions. And also like Arcturus is, yes, known as Arcturians are known for like being these very intentional and intelligent and intentional advanced star beings that are very much connected to healing. And I think I'm trying to think if there's like been any scenes of things with Ravenclaw people that point to that. When I just feel into Ravenclaw, I think of like purples. I feel into like just that very spiritual,
Well,
very
and purple itself
intellectual.
is a higher dimensional color from the chakra system, so absolutely.
Totally, totally. So that's really interesting. And that resonates on some level because, I've had some connections to Arcturians and, they're always there. So,
Yeah, no,
anyways.
and I think that even actually bringing it back to some Nordic lore, the
Mm,
raven is associated with Odin, and it's how he delivers higher information to people. And another piece that I didn't know, even in like Nordic lore, Thor comes down literally on a rainbow bridge, which seems like such a
mm.
like higher dimensional portal of communicating between star systems. So fun little
Okay,
nugget there.
did you ever watch Games of Thrones?
Yes.
Okay, remember as Bran, and spoiler to anybody that hasn't watched it or is going to
Yeah.
watch it,
So
but
pause right now if you.
yes, but like Bran literally communicates through the tree, and he
Mm.
communicates through being a raven.
And that's
Like,
very Nordic lore right there.
yes, and also it's like, how is that happening? Like the Arcturians are known specifically for telepathy.
Yeah.
Like that's a big thing that I've learned from doing like some journeys with the Arcturians, but it's like they're so connected to the mind, the ability to connect through like the interwebs of your telepathic information, like that was such a big thing within Game of Thrones is like Bran would receive these visions and things. Even Harry Potter would receive visions from you know of Voldemort and like those things and towards the very end. And so maybe what happens is like, okay, and just hold on, just
No,
bear with me
go
for a
go
second.
for it. Go
At the
for
very
it.
end, at the seventh movie,
Also,
all,
spoiler alert.
yes, spoiler alert, all of the houses come together to band together to defeat the whatever is happening, right? The war, the the things that were happening.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, like Harry almost had to, like, I don't know, and maybe this is a far reach, but to like learn about the Slytherin, learn about the Ravenclaw, learn about the Hufflepuff, like befriend different peoples in those realms, and like you
No,
know?
it was very much so igniting of those
Yeah.
energies. I'll give you that. Absolutely.
So I don't know, maybe that's a far reach, but maybe that's a story of like learning how to integrate a lot of these different teachings and things from different, I don't know, wisdom paths or
Yeah.
civilizations. Who
Well,
knows? I
and,
don't
and
know.
it and it'll also perfectly lead into the last one I'm going to use the houses to explain, which would be Hufflepuff. And it's
Yes.
funny because I chatted with ChatGPT about this for a while to like come up with a conclusion because we were really torn on how to conclude Hufflepuff, which is no surprise because they always kind of get the shit of everything, Hufflepuff does. And so we actually concluded that Hufflepuff is most likely the Pleiades. And
Mm,
the reason being is a lot of Pleiades star lore actually states that the Pleiades were the original ones to seed the human beings. And so, a lot of the original humans were Pleiades. And that's why a lot of Hufflepuff symbolism is like the badger is like a very earthly animal. So they're most tied to
mhm,
like the earth. And Hufflepuffs are just very like, light ethereal beings, just kind of like doing what they do. And that's kind of the Pleiadian energy. It's very lighthearted. It's very humble. It's very nonchalant, and that's kind of
mhm.
why the Pleiades was kind of given to Hufflepuff. I have no concrete, explanation or delivery for this one, but it's a fun thing to contemplate at least.
Yeah, when I think of the like Hufflepuff, because I took one of those like Harry Potter tests to see which house I was in, and I got Hufflepuff, and I was like, "What is this?" And I was like, totally thought I was a Gryffindor, but no, actually, when I think about it, it makes sense. It's like Hufflepuffs can be sort of like it's almost like that energy that can jump between into different worlds. It can be very
Yeah,
on the physical and be here in the physical world, but it also can be kind of daydreamy and like a little like aloof in another world. It's kind of like very Piscean energy,
it's like the
but
most
also
grounded, ungrounded energy ever, which is such an enigma, you
yes.
know.
And maybe that is the Pleiades. Maybe it is like, speaking about kind of bringing it back to like divine feminine energies that many of these, like Kuan Yin is connected to. She's connected to like more compassionate, more soft, more kindness, but also just more fun and play and creativity and like forgiving. Like I really feel like that Hufflepuff can be that. It's more of like a softer Gryffindor, I guess.
Yeah.
More of like, yeah. Like they
So,
talk about I don't know if you've heard this before, but Leo is connected to me Leo is like Gryffindor.
well,
And
of
people
course.
say yes, and people say that like Libra is actually like a softer Leo archetype. And so maybe that Hufflepuff can be more of a Libra. Like nice to everyone, friends with
No,
everybody, the
I could see that.
mediators. Yeah,
There's
so
something I don't know if I ever told you, and I'm going to throw this one out there right now. Did you know that Harry Potter and I have the same birthday?
no way.
Yeah, he was actually an archetypal Leo. He was born on July 31st and like was meant to be like the archetype of Leo.
No way. That's
So that
wild.
was definitely intentionally written that like he personified those characteristics. I have no doubt in that, considering that was his birthday.
Do you feel like when you watched Harry Potter, it did something like
Well,
watching
well,
his
first off,
path?
my Leo ego, which I'm just now starting to embrace. Of course, I resonated with Harry Potter. I was like,
Yeah.
absolutely. But that being said, what in all seriousness, what I do resonate the most with is, the story of Harry Potter is this journey of like self identity as well, and finding yourself. I mean, that's why it was also those like very crucial ages of life, and he has to make
Hmm.
the decision between good and evil, what path he's going to take, who he's going to actually involve in his life, and I think all of us could obviously relate to that, but I do think there
Totally.
was this grandeur to it, a bit of like stepping into your power at the end of the day. And I think that that's something
Mm.
for me that I struggle with. So I definitely recognize and, definitely resonated with that.
I love that. I love that. I think I definitely resonated with too. And I love just Harry Potter's character arc. Like, you see him in the very beginning going to Harry Potter, like going to Hogwarts, and him just learning and him being like mentored by and guided by different people, and then sort of getting to the end towards the movies, and you see him really step into his power, and he chooses to be a leader and to stand up and to all those things. So it's really fascinating, I think, but it took him a lot to get there, a lot of
Yeah.
hoops, a lot of challenges, a lot of all the things to get to that point of where, okay, no, I I'm honing in my power. I'm going to choose to do the right thing. I'm going to sacrifice and surrender when I feel like the time is right. And I think those are all like universal things that we could all learn from for sure.
No, very much so. And it's one of those things too where I think this is a great segue because I love when you end things. I feel like you just summarized all of our Hogwarts theme. So I'm going to step a little bit beyond that
Yes.
and get a little bit more deep into the sauce, if you will, of Star lore. And so we cover kind of like the main beings that said to be involved in, human evolution, things like that. And
Hmm.
a lot of just the ET actual concrete theories say that we were created from an ET race or influenced by an ET race, 50, 100,000 years at the beginning of modern civilization. And something that I like to share with you, just because my background is in genetics, that's what my undergrad was originally in. So I want to share
Yeah.
some fun information for you that I wonder if you've even ever heard of. So
Hmm.
one of the pieces of genetic information that came across in about 2015, which was kind of under the radar, in that we were finally able to find out what our entire genome looked like. And in
Hmm.
doing so, we were able to make some estimations about the age of our genome and when it first evolved. And one of the very interesting findings that we found was that every single of the billion people on Earth right now is descendant from about 1,000 beings. And that is
Well,
very, very, very atypical for any animal race. Usually, there's no like huge bottleneck like that in the past. Like usually it's just like this evolution. So many people use that to make an argument that maybe we were either a landed species or a created species or a species that
hmm.
was added on here. And further comprehension of that goes is that so the great ape has 48 chromosomes
Hmm.
and humans have 46. And so when you look at our second chromosome, they show that it's actually a fusion of two other chromosomes to go from 48 to 46. So that's like the evolutionary step, at least. However, that being said, that evolution, based off of our current understanding, happened in like 10, 15,000 years when it should have taken like 10 to 15 million years. And also the fusion of that, it's like perfectly clean. Like somebody went into a lab, was like, I'll take this chromosome, let's stick you together. So there is some argument based off chromosome number 2 that there was some genetic engineering or altering. So I find that to be a very like curious thought. And last but not least, I'm going to leave you on before passing the mic back on, is there was a congressional hearing that happened on November 11th, I believe it was, which was actually about unidentified flying objects, which are now called UAPs. And they actually discussed in the congressional hearing, which got no attention, a lot of these concepts. And there's actually people on the board who specifically state that their position in government was to either interact with these beings, was to recover crafts from these beings, was rather to study biologics of these beings. It's a 2 hour conference, totally worth listening to, where we have like our Congress literally discussing these topics openly, and it will kind of literally blow your mind. And before I pass the mic back over, the one species we didn't talk about, which is often talked about as people being the most common stereotypical one, would be the Greys. And they're
Hmm.
said to be a race from that has been very turned off to their emotions, and they're the ones that are supposed to be responsible for the abduction phenomenon, whether or not, again, that's something you want to believe in. So, through a lot of science and a lot of fun things to contemplate at you, where does that kind of land?
You know, there's a lot. There's a lot that's stirring my brain, but I want to add on to one more like star civilization that keeps coming up for me, and something that I've been sitting with and playing with a lot lately and embracing in myself. The qualities that they have is the Lyrian star race, which is connected again to the lion, to that kind of Leo energy, and the first kind of thing that reminds me of this is like the Lion's Gate. It's like 8/8,
Mm-hmm.
August 8th. And oftentimes people will talk about how 8/8 is a portal for the Lion's Gate for the Lyrians to come through and their consciousness to come through. And that's definitely something that I've been really playing with and sitting with, and how they influence us as, on the planet. I think what's really interesting about what you said about the genetics and the DNA, and something that is just a theory, this is just a question in my head. how much, and maybe we can think about this from a Chinese medicine perspective too, because we would talk about DNA, literally the genetics being something connected to the kidney,
Yeah, like the
right?
gym.
Yeah, it's the jing, it's the kidney energy. But what about epigenetics? Like, because they're seeing that the things that you do physically, like your lifestyle that you live, the relationships you have, the work that you do turns on and off genetics or epigenetics. But your genetics itself doesn't get changed, or it maybe does go through some mutation, but not as much as the epigenetics. In
Yeah.
fact, your epigenetic markers tell more about you as in your health, in your happiness, more than your genetics do. That's what they're finding nowadays. And so I wonder more if like the I don't know, the epigenetics is more of a like earthy kind of part of kidney, and the genetics is more of a yang part of of the kidney. I don't know. What is your take on that? And
Yeah.
also, how do we then correlate it back to, okay, wait, there are some connections to these ET beings or these star civilizations. So yeah, I want to hear what your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I think that this is a greatly posed question, and I don't think this needs to be said for the record because I don't necessarily care too much about how this comes across, but I do want to say that, obviously everything we're speaking about right now is neither of us are trying to convince anybody about ET's existence, the truth behind any of this. This is,
Totally.
more of a fun conversation to play around with the information and lore that exists. And so I think how I'm going to answer your question is almost in that it's like how do we integrate and utilize any type of mythology, whether we believe it's real or not. And it's one of
Mm,
those things is that learning the stories of what these things emanate and represent can be very helpful for helping us, utilize those traits. So for existence, like say you are starting a group or foundation, you want to become embody leadership and like, practice being that person, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then maybe you could read about Syrian star lore, which talks about being a leader and things like that. And those stories can
mm.
just be empowerment and help draw things from. So I really want to bring this back to some practical reality type wisdom. And I think that's how I'm going to answer your question that you're kind of proposing. And as I think that if any of these stories, lores exist, simply the paying attention to them, the learning of them, or the discussion of
Mm.
them, I think is going to activate those attributes because that's how us as humans work. Like when
Yep.
we're exposed to a TV show, when we're exposed to a song, when we're exposed to anything that is story or lore, we start emanating some aspect of that part and it starts activating something in us, whether we want to say it's on a
Mhm.
genetic level or just a personality level. I think that that's kind of how that has that interplay. So I do think from what you're saying there that, you know, all of these things are in our soup, if you will, and it almost is where we're paying attention to what's kind of coming up. Does that kind of answer your question?
Totally.
Sense?
I love that. I really, really love that answer because you're right in that, a story or a myth that you learn, or even the community that you're in that are focused on, and devoted to certain archetypes or mythologies, goddess archetypes, things like that, can activate literally on a epigenetic level something in you. And also from a neuroscience level, there's mirror neurons
I
that
say
like,
mirror neurons, mirror
yes,
neurons.
yeah, that like when you see somebody else embodying it, it shows you that it's possible. You're like seeing to believe it true. And so I think that's really, really important to kind of bring back to the practical level, is that a lot of these things that we're talking about are stories, are mythologies, are archetypes, patterns that, again, a human will kind of can learn from or start to embody or start to like understand their own relationship with it through. And I think that's a really, really beautiful way. I also thought about how I listened to this recent podcast with Deepak Chopra. And Deepak Chopra is, the spiritual pioneer. He's written thousands of books. He's a medical doctor as well. And he's really saying like 99% of our life is consciousness and energy, and 1% is matter. Like that's what they're finding. And so when we're operating and we're seeing the world that like, oh, okay, it's my consciousness that really can shift wherever I put my consciousness will expand that thing. Like, for example, if you're studying Freya and really connecting with Freya as an archetype, especially if you're somebody that has those cultural roots, there's something in there that can activate a part of your consciousness and then influence the physical, right? So it's always this like dance that we're doing with energy and to kind of bring it back to
Well,
that.
and it's funny, and
Yeah.
this is one more of my ethereal thoughts of genetics, but especially when I was studying genetics in undergrad,
Mm-hmm.
at that time, 90% of our DNA was misunderstood, and I still think it's about that percentage. So 90% of our
Mm-hmm.
entire genome, we have absolutely no idea what it's doing or what its function is. And my
Wow.
speculation, because I love to speculate, is what if that is our ancestral knowledge? What if
Totally.
all of our ancestors are literally encoded in us? And the reason why I think this is important is because let's say you do come from an ancestral root that has these stories, these tales, these ideas, these beliefs. That's why I think it's very powerful to learn about them, because
Mm-hmm.
you might have those stories literally already in your DNA, and learning and
Mm-hmm.
integrating them can then activate your knowledge of that stuff and help you use it in your today. Like your ancestral gifts that we constantly speak of might literally be encoded inside you. So I
Yeah.
think that that's a beautiful way of looking at it. And then, of course, I want to look at, on a little bit more fun level, I think that maybe even some aspects of our past life history, our galactic history, might be in the genetics as well. But it's
Yeah.
definitely a fun concept to play around with. And I think that this was a perfect little segue too into I'm going to pass the mic on to you by asking you specifically to share, to whatever your comfort level is, some of your QHHT experience specifically with correlation to star beings or systems.
Yeah,
For you
we
personally, obviously.
right. And so we definitely touched on this in the past lives episode. So if you
Yeah.
want like an even deeper dive into our both of our experiences with QHHT or past life regression work, definitely go there and we definitely talk about like star beings and our experiences with it and those concepts and things. But for me to kind of like wrap it in a bow, when I started doing QHHT or receiving it, it definitely blew my mind open to what was possible and what is real. And honestly, it felt like um, the deep things that I received. So, one was a connection to the Arcturians, right? And remembering sort of like these past lives in another world. And it almost feels like a dream, like when you're dreaming and you're kind of like seeing and you're in different places. It's like that's really what it felt like to be in that world with Arcturians and to kind of have these remembrances of like, oh yeah, I remember what it was like to be an Arcturian as I was doing these QHHTs and past life regressions. And so I think those experiences are so valuable to be able to experience some sort of a sense of multidimensional connection to what we're talking about
Yeah.
and to actually have your own experience with it. Because I think we can always share our own experiences and we can share about these, what we've learned and these teachings and things, but it's always different when you experience it. It becomes a wisdom that you hold because you've gone through it or you've tapped into it, you're attuned to it. And so the last thing is this wasn't a QHHT, but I recently had in my meditation this sort of vision, and it was sort of like a continuation of a QHHT that I had before. And it was me as this being and kind of going into this room, and there was like something happening in this room. It was like a healing happening, and I almost could feel what it was like to be that being. And it was like maybe I was meditating, and it almost feels to me like we're getting to this point in consciousness that we can tap into those moments in time. We can have these remembrances of past lives and these connections to multidimensional spaces and worlds and civilizations just by opening and having our own spiritual practices. And so I'm curious for you what your experiences have been with QHHT and even in your own spiritual practice.
Yeah, no. So for me, again, I would reiterate the whole past lives episode is going to have a more greater synopsis on this. But for me, my initial experience with UHHT, I experienced a Mayan Aztecian life in Teotihuacan, and in that lifetime, I could feel the knowledge and knowing that we
Mm.
knew we were from Sirius. Like it wasn't even something that like we needed to like think about. Like I could tell while being that life that we knew we were from that star system. And it was just so interesting because near the end of that life, when we were fast forwarding to the time I died, we actually went back to that star system. And it was one of those things where, I had to take pause because I had actually never even heard of the star system prior to this. So that was pretty
Mhm.
freaking cool that like I brought up a system that I never had heard of. And then secondly, I think it was very enlightening that once I looked into the area, which again, I'd never even heard of Teotihuacan prior to, when I actually
Mhm.
looked into the area, I saw that it was aligned with Sirius. And I was like, mind blowing and opening my mind there. And then also in the book you recommended to me, when they spoke about Green Tara and the Sophia Code, she even said
Mhm.
she was from Sirius C specifically, which again was the exact space I talked about in my QHHC session. So I think
Boom.
what all of this amounts and what all of this kind of creates is, of course, for most of these things, I'm a person who needs validation, in fact. And even with all that validation, in fact, I'm still like, maybe that is, maybe it isn't. But to add to that, I think the value in it, again, is having my own experience and bringing back some wonder of what if,
Yeah.
what if
Yeah.
that is true? Like, what if
Yeah.
that is the case? Even if this isn't a dreamy state, that's still a powerful thing to be able to be creatively thinking about. And, not letting it completely sway or decide my reality, but allowing it to still be a place of playfulness and joy. And I think the last but not least, and it's another area we're planning going into, so a perfect segue is this woman named Julia, and it's B, I can't pronounce her entire last name. She took a whole bunch of QHHT sessions in order to create almost like an algorithm because of so many people in QHHT would speak of being from a star system. So she took all those people who spoke about being from a star system, brought up their charts and saw if there was any correlation between the star system they said they were from and their birth chart. And then she created this algorithm in order to determine, even if you haven't done a QHHC session, where you might be from. And it's so wild when I did my galactic astrology chart and looked at it myself and I put my name into the algorithm, my birth date, the first thing that came up was Sirius. And I was just like, no way. Like, there's no way that this algorithm just worked and validated my experience. And I think looking into that was also another helpful tool, the galactic astrology, kind of digging deeper into these concepts. I think it's another thing to help inform us. And I think at the end of the day, and that's we already touched base on, and I want to go back to is we still need a way to integrate these concepts, ideas, and beliefs into our reality because,
Mhm.
just knowing that you're from the Pleiades or you have association with this or something like that, that's kind of useless information, honestly. That being
Yeah.
said, if you have a way of integrating or utilizing that energy, belief, or lore to help enhance your life or to help um, guide you in some way, shape, or form, it can be a little more useful. And don't get me wrong, I think you're the one that's told me this many times if you just do it just for fun's sake and it's entertaining, that's still a purpose as well. Like that's allowed
Yeah.
as well. But there is other ways of valuing that. I want to know what you kind of think about that.
My last thought on this, and I love what you're saying because there's just so much to learn here. There's so much you can learn about yourself. I listened to this podcast today. It was from a neuroscientist, and they were like, one of the best things you can do is to know yourself, to know your personal patterns, to know how your brain works, to know how, different points of the month, how you feel, and what your personal pattern is. And I think many of these things what we're talking about, these star systems, these civilizations, their qualities, what they stand for, their myths, can resonate with us and maybe illuminate something that, oh, I do resonate with that. I feel like that's how I am. And I also think with art, we had talked about Harry Potter. This is the last thought I have, which is art imitates life and life imitates art. And so what is life but everything and everything encapsulated in that spectrum of consciousness. And I think when we look at art and you look at like big forms of art such as Harry Potter, for example, it is telling a story that literally encapsulates all of these energies that we talked about today, all of these civilizations we talked about today. If you look at different music, like different artists that they're literally channeling information that connects and speaks about these different civilizations, so on and so forth, with paintings and drawings and like so many other things. And so I really feel, especially with this is my last, again, my last thought, with this Neptune and Aries sort of transition, we're definitely going to see bolder, more direct symbolism in art itself and in creativity itself. It's not going to be this like kind of vague thing, that like kind of cloudy, ambiguous thing. It's going to be like, no, this is what we're saying. This is what we're here for. These are the qualities that we stand for. And it's going to be really exciting to see like how much people want to embrace that multidimensionality, you know?
No, and I think that's a beautiful wrap up and a beautiful. I'm feeling that too, is seeing it in the art form, and
Yep,
art informs so much. Art informs sometimes. It informs revolutions. It informs our
totally.
education. It informs like how we go out into the world. And art also motivates us. I don't know if I could get through a workday some weeks if I didn't have a music to jam out to, or some days I'm having
Hmm.
a hard day, having a TV show that I really love to come back to. That's all utilizing art to inform our
Yes.
reality. So I do think it's
Yes.
incredibly,
And
incredibly.
maybe our next podcast is talking about art.
I love the idea of that, especially since I
Yes.
think that's a venture that we're both trying to go on here. And I think that
Yes.
it's, again, our usual intent of these episodes is how to integrate and utilize this information. And luckily, we've already talked about that. We talked about archetypes, reading about these things, discussing these things. And I think that very, very soon there might be a part two to this when something more comes to the surface in the public consciousness or awareness that might make this relevant, and I'm hoping
Yep.
for that day to be sooner than later. And I'm
Yep.
so excited for the creativity of even just our conversation that can come from this. So for me
Yeah.
and for now, that's all I have, and I look forward to
Yep.
another episode.
Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll catch you on the next episode.